Hello and good evening. My name is Moses Ross, and you are watching Progressive Radio on TV. This is being aired on Tuesday, July 6th, and obviously I'm doing a pre-recording here, but it's still the principle of the thing, and this will be getting you up to date on things that are going on here in Oregon and in national news in regards to progressive politics. I think you're going to enjoy today's show. I have two interviews that I'm conducting today. The first interview is with Christina Neves, and she is with the pro-democracy group Common Cause. And we're going to talk about the recent Oregon legislative session and some of the good, some of the bad, some of the ugly, but mostly we're going to talk about campaign finance reform and their efforts, recent efforts to get something good passed during the session, and where we go from here. The second interview will be with Carl Fisher, a Washington County-based Democratic Party activist, and we're going to talk about the big lie and how the big lie has permeated all of our politics on a national level, all the way down to school boards. So stick around and enjoy the show, and thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. This is Moses, and I am joined today with Christina Nieves with Common Cause. Common Cause is a pro-democracy group that is a national group, but they also have an Oregon chapter, and that's where she works. And we're going to have a nice little discussion here about campaign finance reform and the most recent efforts, give a little bit of history, but give, most importantly, an update on campaign finance reform here in Oregon. What happened in the legislature? You know, it seems like it was so close. So Christine, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Moses. Hi, everyone. Again, Christina Nieves, she, her pronouns, Associate Director of Common Cause Oregon. I would say, so there are a few things I want to touch on. There's some really great successes that we've had during this legislative session. Common Cause Oregon, with other advocates, including Moses and other organizations, have really been focused on campaign finance reform as well, building on the momentum of Measure 107. So I just want to kind of frame things in that way, is like we've had a lot of successes related to correcting past harm and also paving a way forward for changing the status quo. We've also been dealing with the impacts of COVID, right? So the legislative process was not the same, right? For advocates, for electeds, for everyday people who are engaged, it was not the same. So I want to start with that framing and just honor the fact that our legislative leaders, our advocates, our advocacy organizations have done so much work in spite of so many barriers and challenges. And we did have some success. Have some success. Go ahead.
You know, I was just going to say, in regards to some of those successes, obviously there are other issues that Common Cause is focused on, but a general description is that they are pro-democracy in that sense. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, so I can just list off.
What are some other issues, I guess, beyond campaign finance reform, very quickly, just some of the other issues that Common Cause has approached?
Absolutely. So equity issues, for example, key legislation that passed, supporting reparations for African Americans, improving language access, making it easier for folks to participate on a board or commission, which is a major way that everyday people can have an impact on decision making. And towards the end of this interview, I want to provide a link. We have a really easily accessed bulleted description of all of the democracy related bills. But I do want to focus on the fact that equity was really so important and actually saw a lot of success in terms of the bills that were able to pass during this legislative session. Then another piece also was voter disinformation. We know that information is key. It is absolutely crucial for folks to be able to have the confidence and the ability to participate in our democratic process. So stopping voter disinformation, there was a bill that passed making sure that, people it is illegal to trick people.
Right.
It is illegal to trick people. And so, yeah, that's another issue that Common Cause focused on.
But it's interesting too. Campaign finance reform is, in my opinion, one of the most underestimated issues out there right now, is because it's addressing a status quo. It's addressing an ingrained way of doing business. And so it's going to be tough, just like any kind of a habit that an individual has over multiple years or over a long time. Campaign finance is quite addictive to the current parties and to candidates out there. And there's an argument that it should be called legalized bribery here in Oregon because of the flexibility of the laws out here and the ambiguity of the laws. What was going on with legislative efforts though this year? What was different this year?
Yeah. Well, again, the pandemic had a huge, shift in how we were able to advocate, and then for our folks inside, our Capitol, legislate. But again, I do want to focus on the fact that Common Cause Oregon and other advocates have been working on this for years and years and years and years. And with the passage of Measure 107, as you said, like 78% of voters said, hey, you know what? We need to be able to change our system so that people and not special interests are able to influence our democratic process, right? In terms of what happened, we had a lot of really great efforts and champions. We had Representative Salinas, who we worked with, and you're obviously aware of this, who put together a very good bill to pass contribution limits, right? Limiting the influence of big donors and big donors on politicians. And we also had Senator Golden, longtime advocate of democracy and reforming campaign finance systems. He put up a bill to increase transparency, exposing hidden money, funding political ads so that voters know who is trying to influence them. And then Representative Rayfield, who fought to create a public campaign finance system that would help to amplify every voice in our electoral system. So these three champions, leaders, efforts, they all work together. The city of Portland, with open and accountable elections, has all of these three pieces, right? And we can always do better. But I just really respect these three elected officials for pushing the work in a very unsure and dicey legislative session.
Right. So just to reiterate, then there was actually legislation out there for my audience, just to kind of clarify, that addressed what is called in campaign finance reform the three-legged stool of campaign finance reform.
Right. Yep.
One side of it, there was one bill that that addressed limits, how much a person or an individual or group or a PAC can contribute to a candidate. Those range nationwide from limits to $500, $200 all the way up to unlimited, like it is here in Oregon. And then the second leg of that stool is disclosure, correct? The idea that you need to be to know who is donating to those larger groups that are donating to the campaigns. And then the third part of the stool is public funding.
Right.
And this was the first time that public funding had even come up as a potential legislative approach.
Yes. Yeah. At the state level, I believe it seemed more of a potential a potential reality during this legislative session. And, unfortunately, we were not able to pass any of these bills, right? Contribution limits, the transparency bill, and then, public campaign finance. But hope is not lost. I do believe that folks really started to pay attention about how and ask questions and learn more of like what does it mean when we put these three things together? You know, what is the potential success that we can have? What change can be made when we put these three things together?
That's, that's very powerful too. And I think it's Oregonians, we've had this conversation before in the past with some of the past measures that they had back in the 90s. They want it. It's just been very difficult to get. Where does it go from here?
Yeah. So, we have a couple options. First of all, as I said, not all hope is lost through the legislative process. We have a short session coming up. Advocates have been working together to really actually just take hold of so if we don't have to necessarily negotiate and we bring, a bill together. What do we want? What is it that we want? And then, move forward with presenting that to our legislative body. So working through the short session, that's one opportunity. And then there's also the ballot initiative process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of our democracy. And it's also an opportunity for folks to feel, engaged and feel renewed and not so disenchanted with our political process.
Amen to you on that. I mean, and that is one good not a byproduct, but that is one good aspect of our established process here is that you always have the ballot initiative, ballot measure process to go through. And from what I understand in 2020, the goal here, potential goal would be to develop a ballot measure, gathering signatures and getting it on the ballot here on a statewide basis that actually has those three legs in it. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. And what I'm really excited about is the fact that we are going to be able to engage. We have so much opportunity to engage so many people in this discussion. Like what does this mean to you? And it's more inclusive, I guess, the ballot initiative process. But yes, that's correct. We would be seeking for 2022.
Fantastic. It's interesting. I like how you say the inclusiveness of the ballot, the signature gathering process. I hadn't thought about that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it is kind of forcing a exposure of an issue to a broad swath of the community. And sure, the vast majority of signature gathering is done in areas where there's a cross section, a diversity of folks that are there. So I'll have to, that's an interesting perspective. Thank you for that. And, we have just a couple minutes left. Campaign finance reform, where do you see the best case scenario? We get this, let's say that this happens in 2022 or the legislature actually creates a law. What happens? How does that affect things? What happens? What do you see happening from that?
I'm going to start with a macro response. Renewed hope in our system. That's the big goal, because we will have folks who never thought that they could participate, never thought that they could have a voice, speak up then, right? Money does not control my life. I mean, it does sometimes, right? But money does not control our political process. There are other people here, and our system is really trying to reflect the fact that democracy and we the people matter. That's kind of the big picture, more people of color, more women, more folks who are not included in sort of what the status quo is definition of political candidates will feel like they have an avenue to run. And I feel like more issues actually will be able to be brought forth that weren't able to be brought forth because, only issues are only brought forth in the political discussion if they are from, somebody that has power, right, to be talked about. So I think we're going to open up conversations,
Yes.
and we're going to renew hope.
That's fantastic. And on that very positive note, I'm going to end our conversation and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for taking some
Thank
time out of
you.
your day to talk to me about campaign finance reform, Christina.
Thank you.
I'm really happy here to be with my fellow Politico here locally, Carl Fisher. Carl Fisher is a state central committee member of the Democratic Party of Oregon, representing Washington County. He's a long-term political activist. And also, he has a wonderful hobby that we might talk a little bit about, and that's his political collecting hobby. And he has actually gotten me a little enthusiastic about that as well. Maybe we'll compare our collections, although I don't think I can compare to Carl's collection, but that's for another story. Carl, thanks for being here.
Oh, nice to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Happy Independence Day and everything that it represents. Isn't it kind of, there's some irony. There is some sincere irony about our 4th of July holiday this year, given the events of the last couple of years, the Trump presidency, the January 6th insurrection, and the rise of nationalism. Carl, this big lie that's being perpetuated by the GOP, tell me your thoughts on how it's affecting things nationwide, and then let's bring it back down to a local level.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I'm still waiting for my invitation to Donald Trump's summer inauguration. I mean,
didn't he postpone that till September?
I mean, it just seems like it started in March, and then it got pushed to the summer, and now September. It's like, I don't know when it's supposed to really happen. I mean, if it's going to happen, I mean, that's, the big part of the big lie is that he didn't lose. So, we're going to have this fictional inauguration at some point. I think it's sort of got people, it's meant to rile people up, like his supporters, the diehard supporters who don't believe Joe Biden won the election. It's supposed to, keep them going, just keep them going. Well, it's like waiting for your Christmas present. And every day you're looking at the day, okay, Christmas is coming. I can open my presents soon. Oh, but he keeps moving the goalposts. Oh, well, Christmas isn't really the 25th of December. It's, going to be a couple weeks later. So just hold off. We got the present. You got your present, but, you can't open it right now. And these folks are just eating that up. They're just waiting with anticipation for when it actually happens.
Isn't it that whole concept of a leap of faith and overlaying that instinctive human nature of faith, of belief, and then overlaying it with the propaganda, the blatant propaganda approach that the GOP is taking, smacking of Goebbels, in how premeditated this how obvious to somebody like you and I that this is pure propaganda, and it's being used to manipulate.
And people are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. Like,
I don't know. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't, try to analyze why it resonates. But what I can say is that it's definitely a proven methodology to reinforce a perspective.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we were both Hillary supporters, right?
Yes.
So when Hillary, lost the electoral college vote, we didn't stick around, and telling our friends and family, well, don't you worry, Donald Trump won't be president for long. In March of 2017, Hillary Clinton will really get inaugurated. Right. And when that didn't happen, we didn't go around and say, don't wait, don't worry. In the summer of 2017, Hillary will get inaugurated. Don't worry about that. No Hillary supporter did that.
I mean, talk about such a bridge that has been crossed by a political bridge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not saying that this hasn't been done before in the past, but not to this magnitude of propaganda, of perpetuating this belief, this false belief.
Yeah.
And what just amazes me is the receptiveness by so many people in our country to this lie, to this obviously blatant lie.
Yeah.
You know, and from that perspective, it saddens me that so many of the gullibility of these folks. What do we do about that? How do we confront that, Carl, as political, as pro-democracy activists, not just party activists, pro-democracy activists? What do we do? How do we deal with that?
I'm trying to struggle to think of if there's anything we can do. Like, when you operate in a world where basic facts are considered fake news, I don't know if you can come back from that. Like, it would take a very jarring event, I think, for someone to wake themselves up from that.
Well, you would have thought that the January 6th insurrection would have been that event. And for some people, it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was the wake-up call that they needed to make them realize the potential, you know, the loss of our experiment, our democratic experiment here in the U.S.
I mean, you got to figure, if you're a conservative and you can't go along with Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney, two very conservative people and ideologically opposite of me, that they call out the big lie, I don't know what your ideology is at that point. That's
right. And it's almost to the point where it doesn't really matter to them if it was right or wrong. It's, you know, it's like a 3-year-old child that wants something, it gets taken away and they cry about it and they fixate on it. Yeah. You know, we've taken away a fundamental belief or a fundamental truth, if you will, away from these folks, and now they're overcompensating. But you know, I'll tell you, Carl, it's very frustrating to be, you know, here we are, these dealing in truths and trying to deal with opponents that are dealing in non-truths. I mean, two different levels, two different perspectives. I mean, and so that's the challenge. I think, my attitude is that we as activists, all we can do is just educate the ones that are open. You know, there is no way that I'm going to convince, without a lot of work, a MAGA wearing, hat wearing acolyte of Trump. You know what I mean? I mean, it would take, you're not going to do it by knocking on a door. It's a longer term strategy. And so, okay, so fine, that's 30% of the population, 25% of the population. That means that there's 65% of the population that is based in reality. And they're the convincible ones. They're the ones that we can convince.
And we especially need to convince the ones that didn't participate in the last election to get engaged in politics. I mean, there's an old pamphlet I remember from the 1950s I found once, and on the cover it had these, you know, despondent-looking people on it, and it had the simple text, "Like it or not, you're involved in politics." You know, politics is all around you. There's no avoiding it. You know, by not voting, you're not saving yourself the headache of politics. You're just making it harder.
Right. You know, and it's interesting too, you know, when it comes to the leveraging politics to get things done to improve your life or to improve your community, you know, when it comes to that, it's such a pure motivation. And you always hear stories of people that it took one issue that was very personal to them to motivate them, to inspire them to make political change.
Yep.
To get involved and make political change. Great example. Former Oregon Governor Barbara Roberts got involved in politics. She was just a mom.
Mm-hmm.
She got in politics because of her son, who had autism, if I remember correctly. So, and look at her distinguished career. Look at the effect that she had on the government, on our lives here in Oregon. You know, and it was just that one thing, you know, that vested interest that she had. And Carl, you know, while I'm talking, I'm realizing maybe that's the key. The idea that we have to bring this down to a personal level for those people that are being caught up in this big lie. We have, that's the only way, one of the few ways that I can think of that we can change their perspective is that it has to affect them personally. And even
I would hope that the people who have been, you know, prosecuted for January 6th have realized that it's going to affect them very personally.
I sure hope so, you know. And let's just expanding on this analogy, you know, it's like with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can, many people that did not wear masks didn't wear masks because of philosophical or ideological reasons.
Yeah.
And they didn't change until like their parents died.
Yeah.
Until they knew somebody that died of COVID.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, oh my God, what am I doing? You know?
I mean, I think there was a story recently in the news about the guy who had like a lung transplant because of COVID, and he didn't want to get vaccinated or anything before that. And now he's realizing what a mistake that was. And
I venture to say that that same kind of a scenario will eventually happen with the people that have been sucked into the big lie. You know, they're going to one day realize it. I would like to think many of them will. Some will never.
Yeah.
You know, just like there are hardcore liberals, Democratic Party liberals, there are hardcore GOP. You know. Yeah. So the point is that we have to, it's a longer term project to try to convince those people, but we have to convince the people, or not convince, we have to talk and educate the people that we can. And that is such a large enough majority. I think that's sufficient. Does that make sense? Or
I mean, it comes down to, you know, all politics is relational.
Yeah, that is very true. You know, and hey, let's, you know, speaking of relational, let's take this big lie and bring it down to a statewide level here in Oregon. And we've got some great examples. You know, State Representative Mike Neerman is a wonderful example of someone who got sucked into the big lie and ran with it.
Yeah.
And for those viewers that may not be aware, Mike Neerman is the state representative that was recently expelled from the Oregon legislature because of his participation in opening the locked door of the Oregon Capitol, allowing protesters, right-wing protesters, to come in and do their thing during.
And this was all before January 6th, so this was sort of like a prelude to January 6th.
Very true, very true. You know, you look at the videos of the event too. I mean, it's just so obvious that this guy Neerman, this representative Mike Neerman, intentionally did this.
Yeah.
Opened that door to allow those rioters into the hallowed halls of the Oregon Capitol.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to Neerman, let's say this. Okay. I mean, let me ask you this, Carl. What are your thoughts as someone who works in the Capitol? You work in the Capitol.
Yep.
How did that affect you?
I mean, it's really discomforting to think that, you know, somebody who's a member of that, because it's a tight-knit community. Oregon politics is very tight-knit, even if you're in another party, especially when you work in the legislature. I mean, there's only so many people who work in that building, and to have such disregard for their safety that you would do that and let folks in, and we weren't sure what their intent was, but when they came in contact with the Oregon State Police, they sure made their intent known. So it's like, do you want someone who would do that to their colleagues and the staff in the building, put their safety in jeopardy? Do you want someone like that around? And the legislature thankfully did the responsible thing and held Mike Neerman accountable for his actions, and they expelled him.
Well, and this was not a partisan vote either.
No.
The expulsion vote was not partisan. It was completely bipartisan. There was only
59-1.
And the one vote was Neerman.
Yep.
So what does that tells me? That there was a very broad consensus that this man did something amazingly inappropriate.
Yes.
Borderline illegal.
Well, I mean, I think he has some misdemeanor charges. Had he had anything happened that would have led to a felony charge, he wouldn't have been allowed to be back in the legislature, because that's, where we're going with this, is that he did apply for the appointment to his old job, and the Republican PCPs in his district did make him the #1 pick.
Which is amazing to me. Okay, so let me fill the background here with what you just said to my viewers. Okay, so Representative Mike Neerman, representing McMinnville, is that correct?
I would say like rural Dallas, I think, is the biggest city.
Wow. Okay, so this is a rural. This is probably a majority rural district.
Benton, Yamhill, Polk, and Marion counties.
Okay, so now, for my audience, that's a very rural area. It's not middle of Portland. Mm-hmm. And so that's how a guy like Mike Neerman gets elected in the first place. So what has happened is that the state legislature, in a bipartisan manner, 59-1, expelled Representative Neerman from the Oregon legislature. When there is a opening in the legislature like that, a resignation, or in this case, an expulsion, the party that former representative was in gets to nominate and appoint, or nominate at least, their replacement.
Yep, they're allowed to nominate up to from 3 to 5 people
as a potential replacement for this state representative or for this legislator. This would also happen in the same way in the Senate. Mm-hmm. And then after the party faithful, the precinct committee people for that party within the district, the precinct committee people are the representatives of the party in the neighborhoods. So they choose 3 to 5 potential candidates to replace the Neerman in this case.
Yep.
Those candidates then are presented as a slate to the commissioners, the county commissioners within the counties within that legislative district.
Yep. And the vote of the county commissioners is weighted depending on how much of the county is in the district.
Right. Yes. Okay. So, for instance, that's self-explanatory. It's weighted by how many. If it's a small percentage of your district is in Polk County, you get a proportional vote. The commissioners in Polk County get a proportional vote.
Yeah.
So, what did the Republican precinct committee people do? They renominated Mike Neerman.
Yep.
As to replace Mike Neerman.
Their first choice. He's the first choice of the PCPs.
Which is amazing to me. Okay, so now this slate of candidates now will be going to this board of commissioners made up of the counties that are within the legislative district, and then they will have a proportional vote on whether or not for whom to appoint. They can choose one of those candidates that the precinct committee people chose, or they can choose their own. They don't do that very often. They have done it in the past.
Well, I think they can only choose their own if the PCPs had failed to give them a list of 3 people.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're there. So you're telling me that the commissioners are stuck with the choices that they have,
Mm-hmm.
and their number one choice, the number one ranked choice, is Mike Neerman.
Yeah, and very rarely, we've had about, I think, 20 of these appointments since 2017. I don't think in any of those appointment processes did the county commissioners not choose the first choice of the PCPs.
So let's talk about the ramifications of that for a second, Carl. Okay, so the guy gets expelled. He gets renominated by his party. He gets appointed by the commissioners.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, he's back.
Yep.
And there's nothing really anybody can do about it.
No. I mean, they could choose to decide, like the speaker could decide, well, you're not going to be on any committees, any commissions. They can do all that type of stuff like in-house to a member. But in terms of, they are stuck with him at that point. That's
amazing. That sounds like such a Trump survival tactic.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Come out, go through all this whole process, get, of accountability, and then have it not matter.
I mean, it's unfortunate that Mike Neerman has shown, I don't believe, any remorse for his actions. He still believes what he did was totally proper. Opening the Capitol. I mean, the reason the Capitol was closed was because of the pandemic. And you heard a lot during this last legislative session about people saying how, the Capitol not being open is preventing authentic participation in the legislative process, even though the legislative process was probably the most open it's ever been. Mm-hmm. The ability to submit testimony and to give testimony online meant that no matter where you lived, if you had an internet connection, you could connect to people in the Capitol. You could have a meeting with a representative. I mean, representatives leaned into Zoom and Microsoft Teams like I've never seen. Almost every meeting we had was a virtual meeting of some kind.
And I truly hope that they are able to, society as a whole, not just the Oregon legislature, can take this experience that we've had with the pandemic and this this changeover, this switch over to the virtual world to do our meetings, to do participation, voter participation, that sort of thing. I hope they make it permanent. It just makes so much sense. I mean, how many hearings? Normally the hearings would have to be done in person. You'd have to travel to Salem to be able to participate, right?
Yep.
And I mean,
the reason the Capitol was closed was because Marion County had not been meeting the metrics to reopen once OHA and the governor's office had established those metrics to get reopened, where you had to hit like 65% vaccination rate for those eligible to get shifted down to the low risk status. And then when the whole state hit 70%, everything was going to reopen. I mean, for the last month of June in the legislature, everybody was wondering, will Marion County hit that threshold to open the Capitol? And I think the closest they got was 60%.
Wow. That's not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so that's so unfortunate too.
Whereas, up here in Washington County where I am, we were at 70% long before June 30th.
Right. And we're at 70% in Multnomah.
Yep.
Multnomah County. We did make it.
Yep.
And just as a side note, go get vaxxed if you haven't. Go get your jab.
Yep.
Please, for God's sakes, go get your jab.
Yep.
So we've got. So there's Neerman sliding back in potentially.
Yep. I think the county commissioners are either meeting by the 7th of July or they have to meet by the 7th of July.
Well, I'll report back on that one next month for my viewers here. Hey, we've got about 5 more minutes, Carl. Let's talk about I know what we'll talk about. Let's talk about redistricting.
Yeah.
That's coming up. And the redistricting, as you know, just to edify my viewers, redistricting is an event that happens every 10 years where they take the census numbers and they reevaluate the congressional, actually all the legislative districts within a state and create them based off of the new population totals and distribution. It's a once a decade event. And here in Oregon, it has a pretty big effect because right now we have 5 congressional districts, 5 representatives in Congress. And redistricting will be creating a 6th congressional district. And meaning we're going to have another congressman. This is a pretty big deal. So let's talk about that effect-wise. What is that going to do to Oregon's influence, ability to get things for it on the federal level?
Well, I mean, it'll certainly give us another team player, hopefully. It's always a hopeful that if you get a new member of Congress, they want to represent Oregon just as well as everyone else that's in Congress and are going to play ball with the other members of Congress from Oregon. So they're going to, coordinate their efforts in tandem with the other representatives of our state. We've seen this all the time in congressional history where, the House and the senators work with each other to bring back funds for Oregon. I think the, really great showing of this was Mark Hatfield and Les Aucoin and the other House members on transportation getting Portland the Max line. I mean, that would not have happened without Mark Hatfield, a Republican, and Les Aucoin, a Democrat in the House, Hatfield in the Senate, working together to bring money back to Oregon.
Just a quick side note on that, you guys. The original money that they used to create the Max line, the light rail line in Portland, was originally money that was devoted specifically for the Mount Hood freeway development. And that was the Robert Moses architect designed freeway system that was going to be installed or built here in Portland. And it would have divided up, it would have ran along Powell Boulevard, it would have just sliced up Portland dramatically. And they were able to get through their legislative lobbying, your Les Aucoin, Hatfield, they were able to get a waiver for that. They were able to get flexibility on the use of those funds. And so they were able to devote those funds from the Mount Hood Freeway specifically for light rail, for the development of an internal transit system like that.
Yeah.
So, that just amazes me. I mean, that's collaboration. That's cooperation. That's how you get things done. That's an example of of our leadership listening to the community. The community didn't want a new freeway. So,
but like all things, like before you can bring back the funds for Oregon, you have to get to Congress. And when we don't know where the district is, it's sort of like a guess who game of who could be that new member of Congress.
Right. And you and I were talking about this earlier about how the options. Okay, so they're going to be creating this new congressional district, and there have been pockets of population increased population in different areas around the state. Mostly in Washington County, in Clackamas County, out there towards Bend and Hood River. Along, I think down in some of the, I think I'm hitting.
Yeah, I think there's been some growth in Marion County as well. Yeah.
Point being is that this new congressional district has to take into account that growth. Is going to take into account that growth, and so
all of the districts will take into account that growth because they all have to either expand or contract depending on where they're starting from.
So I guess the point of all of this is that congressional district, they could decide it could be in the Portland Metro. They could decide it could be following the Columbia River. They could do it down, stretching from the coast towards Corvallis.
Yep.
we just don't know.
Yeah.
And until they actually dig into until they finish. And so recently here, like for instance, there are people already stepping up for this new seat. Loretta Smith here in Portland stepped up running for Congress. She doesn't even know where is it?
No, because that's the beauty about running for Congress is you don't have to live in the district you're running for.
That's amazing to me. So somebody down right now at this moment in time, we don't know the congressional districts, but somebody in Corvallis could announce that they were running for Congress for the new seat and could run for it even if that district isn't in their city.
I mean, it's hard. It's going to be harder for, if all these candidates announce and then they find out, let's say they're all Portland Metro people like Loretta Smith is, and then they announce that the new congressional district's going to be in the Bend area. So then those candidates have to make a decision. Are they going to double down and say, okay, I'm going to stay in this race, even though there could be someone from Central Oregon who has a lot more name recognition than those people from the Portland metro area has, and they have a much better shot at winning a Central Oregon congressional district.
Too many unknowns right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there were certainly pros and cons for Loretta announcing early as she did, with the ambiguity of not knowing where she was going to represent, whom she was going to represent, the outline of the district. And the pros being that she's the very first one. She's got the audience all by herself. She's got the media megaphone all by herself right now. It gives her time to do networking, build up name, yada yada. There's just a lot of pros to it. The con is, of course, like what you're talking about. She could end up. It could be a congressional district in Eastern Oregon, and or Corvallis, and what do you do then? You don't run against Earl Blumenauer. You don't run against an incumbent. For Congress, at least. I mean, unless I think the last time that an incumbent had a real solid opponent was David Wu, when he was in Congress out there in Washington County. I mean, DeFazio did have a good opponent last year. There was a lot of concern about DeFazio's opponent, Alex Scorsese, or what was his name? Yeah. But I'm talking about more in the primary. But the point is that this new congressional district is going to really has the potential to really upset the whole apple cart when it comes to political territory and political careers.
Well, and we're just talking about it on the terms of like the federal level and getting a new representative. We haven't even touched on the possibilities of what that means for the local party. For the local party, that means, you've got another congressional district, group for the Democratic Party of Oregon. You've got another chance for someone to be an elector in the Electoral College. Yeah.
That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be interesting to see how redistricting will affect these legislative districts, state legislative districts, specifically Neermans. It'll be interesting to see how they mess with that, if they do at all. And that's the challenge about redistricting is, well, quite frankly, making sure that it's equitable, that it's fair. If redistricting can be a very partisan exercise. Republicans and Democrats have used gerrymandering and redistricting as the excuse for gerrymandering to dramatic effect.
And we've also got, new discussions. It's been 10 years since the last one. And I would say, the last one was maybe more about incumbent protection, because in 2010, when the legislature, when the House was 30-30, I think incumbents, generally got, protected in that type of environment. Now that Democrats are firmly in the majority in the House and the Senate, you wonder, are there going to be bigger discussions about, equity in redistricting? And are we going to have, what does community of interest mean now with an equity lens attached to it? Is community of interest simply geography where you live? Or is there more to community of interest than just, the zip code?
Wow. That's it. You know what? You just brought up a point I hadn't even thought about. And that is looking through the redistricting through a DEI lens, a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens.
Mm-hmm.
And, shame on me. I mean, what a good example of the need to be looking at it through that.
Yeah.
If someone who's involved in politics didn't immediately think about that, then obviously a lot of people aren't.
Yeah.
And that is certainly the trend for equality right now, is to change your perspective toward using that diversity and equity lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bet, yeah, you're right. Those legislators, when they start to dig into the redistricting, and it's a real hot topic right now. It's a very big, important topic.
Mm-hmm.
Many legislators have been elected because of this topic of late. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects, if they truly follow it during redistricting.
Yeah.
And how in turn it will affect those border lines.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, just to expand on this for a moment, the Hispanic community has a high concentration in certain areas of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Are they being taken into account in redistricting, or is it strictly for population purposes? In the past, it's been strictly population, yes?
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting. It'll be a lot of fun. And that just makes for a fun summer for politicos like you and I, because we're going to be figuring this stuff out.
Yeah.
Let me end on this. When will we know more about redistricting?
I believe that they're having a special session about it in September.
Wow. And the goal here is to have it all done in time for next year's elections.
Yeah.
So that means realistically, they've only got 6 months to do this.
Mm-hmm.
They have to do it by the end of the year.
Yeah.
At least, to allow enough time for stuff.
Yeah.
Politicking and stuff. So that's another issue that should be on your radar, folks, when you're looking at the Oregon legislature and you're looking at Oregon politics. We've got redistricting coming up, and it's going to be a fun one. And hopefully, as we talked about, they'll look at it from a broader, more inclusive perspective this year, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Carl, there's a lot happening, and I know you have a lot on your plate. Have you been staying cool?
Yes. So we have our 2 air conditioners in the house, and that got me through the heat dome, the 115-degree days. I just parked myself and did my work in front of the air conditioner.
I do not blame you, sir. I do not blame you. I'm glad you're staying cool. To all the viewers out there, I hope you made it through that heat dome. That was crazy. Triple-digit heat here in Portland and across the state, across the region. That was weird, man.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Carl, thank you for your time today, and thanks for this conversation. And onward we go.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you take care. Thank you. So in closing this evening, I do want to thank my guests, Carl Fisher from Washington County and Christina Nieves with Common Cause Oregon. We had a good discussion tonight about what's been going on over the last 30 days here in Oregon and nationally, and I'm appreciative. Also, I'm appreciative to the staff here at Willamette Falls Media Center. Without them, this show wouldn't happen. Specifically, Marv and his awesome wife, Donna. Thank you. So, hey, folks, thank you for watching Progressive Radio on TV, and we'll see you in the month of August. Take care.